Welcome to the Fallon Forum. That's Brother Trucker in downtown kicking off our conversation here today in the Webcast One live studio in the Skywalk, where I don't know anybody would want to be in the Skywalk today when it is such a gorgeous day here in the cultural and culinary crossroads of the continent.
Well, I brought two guests up from Missouri, and they think it's not humid here.
Not humid here? Well, probably compared to Missouri, it's yeah. Well, and again, we've got a cleaner, fresher outlook on life here than they do down there, and that helps reduce the humidity level overall.
And we were on the right side in the Civil War.
We got lucky. We're also on the right side in the Honey War. Do you even know about the Honey War?
I'm not familiar.
It was a battle between Iowa farmers and some folks in northern Missouri over honey, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, we won. Anyway. All right, we'll talk more about the Honey War. So I'll bet your brother Steve knows all about the Honey War.
Probably,
yeah. And I bet it never comes up at Thanksgiving dinner.
It does not.
No, by design.
I don't do Thanksgiving with my brother.
Hey, Charles Goldman's in the studio with me, folks, today. We're going to talk about medical malpractice. We're also going to, later in the program, meet with Nick Harrington. He's here for the big labor convention, but we're going to talk with him about the rally in Ames this past weekend to hold Steve King, Congressman Steve King, even scarier than the novelist, to hold Steve King accountable for his crazy talk on immigrants with calves the size of melons. And, you know, I've been harvesting melons, and he's got a point there. Some of those melons are pretty big, and I can imagine that one melon might equal the amount of marijuana you'd smuggle across the border. But, of course, we know, according to Steve King, that for every one valedictorian sneaking across the desert, there's 100 of them smuggling melons or marijuana. Anyway, we're going to talk with him about that later in the program.
He's going to give a guest appearance on The Bridge. You know, that show about, it's a show on FX about a murder on the border. And
I'd love to get him doing a guest appearance on this show, but I think that's unlikely.
Pretty unlikely.
Anyway, I want to thank our sponsors, the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, also Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Great March for Climate Action. I want to thank Gateway Market and Cafe for sponsoring this program as well, this particular segment, that is. They're at 20th and Woodland, folks. Check them out for a great breakfast, lunch, or supper, and also a great selection of groceries. A lot of it purchased right here from Iowa farms and Iowa producers. Also in the studio with us, Charles, I'm going to let you introduce our other esteemed guests. And this is esteemed, not as esteemed because of too much humidity, but esteemed because they've got some pretty interesting credentials relevant to the conversation about medical malpractice.
Right, and that's a conversation we've had in the past.
Right.
And so I brought a different side, since we've talked as doctors previously. And first, I guess, in the red shirt is Larry Ferguson. Larry has written a essay, which I had the opportunity to read, concerning what he, as a experienced plaintiff's lawyer and also as an experienced insurance claims VP, feels about our present tort system and how it is not addressing the needs of society or even of the individuals involved in medical malpractice. And his associate, Andrew Withington, is with him.
And you're both from Missouri?
That's correct.
What part?
I was originally from St. Louis. I've been living in Columbia for about 9 years now, and no plan to return.
Okay. Okay. I'll tell all my Cardinal friends that. Yeah, another defector. So anyway, I think the problem is, people. There have been a lot of debates here in Iowa about medical malpractice, and they have tended to go nowhere.
Right.
And at the national level, we've seen very little movement as well.
I think the only thing that came up in Iowa this term was the issue of a certificate of merit to bring a case, and that did not go anywhere.
Right.
I think one thing that Larry can talk to is that Iowa is actually not a particularly high verdict state, and for that reason, a certificate of merit could be actually blocking access to the courtroom, because that starts to the expenses rolling before you even get started. Even though that is a very favorite part of tort reform. So, I don't know, Larry, maybe you can talk to certificate of merit.
Actually, there was a time when the certificate of merit was a good thing, and that is early in the game. Give a little history here. I was a claim manager in the mid-'70s, and this is when medical malpractice started to become a favorite cause of action. Prior to then, another form of insurance reform swept the country, which was called no-fault automobile insurance. And it was supposed to be the next big thing that was supposed to get rid of all these plaintiffs' lawyers and this ridiculous system. And it didn't work at all. And the only place that still has it is where it originated, Massachusetts. But it so scared the plaintiffs' bar that they started having seminars about what are we going to do when we can't bring auto cases anymore. And they all decided to become malpractice lawyers, or a good number of them did.
Really?
Yeah, and they had seminars and one thing and another. Now, the problem was these people didn't know any medicine, and they didn't know the law of professional liability, but this didn't stop them, of course. And so they rolled on, and anybody who would come in the door who had a gripe about something that happened at the hospital or at their doctor's office, they would sign them up and file a lawsuit for them. And the case could have absolutely zero merit whatsoever, and there they'd be in court, and that forces you to defend the case, and the longer they're there, the more that would be spent on the defense. And so then their basic idea was, well, it's going to cost you $10,000 to defend this case, pay me $5,000, I'll go away. Yeah. And the insurance industry, the defense bar, were looking for some way to combat that. And that's where the certificate of merit came in the first place.
Right.
And actually, when it came in, I was running a malpractice company, and what it did was it reduced claim volume by about 80% right off the bat, because we got rid of a whole bunch of cases that never should have been in the system anyway, okay? Because there was no way that any doctor would stand up and say this was a valid case. So it was a good thing then, but it's been taken and contorted and now has become, as Charlie Goldman just told you, it's become a very expensive gateway item to try to keep cases out of the system. So it has changed over the years.
Well, what's the status in Missouri, let's say, in terms of the tort reform package? What are the things that have changed?
We have a very difficult set of parameters in Missouri. We have a very stringent expert witness certification rule. From the time a malpractice suit is filed, the lawyer has 90 days to present an affidavit that says he has a report from a qualified expert, and qualified means someone in the same or similar specialty, that verifies the allegations of his case. And if he can't present this, he's tossed out of court.
Mm-hmm. What about the issues? I mean, a lot of tort reform revolves around limitations on economic damages.
Correct.
And has that really worked? In California, they claim that it has.
Well, it depends upon how we're going to define worked. But I will say this. We in Missouri had previously a limitation of $350,000 on all non-economic damages. Now, what that meant was you could be horribly burned and scarred. You could have a young person lose their ability to have children. Those were all non-economic damages. You could have someone doomed to a life of crippling pain. That's a non-economic damage. So those caps serve to make sure that people who had the worst possible claims were not going to get the amount of money that would be fair for their claim, and it discouraged the bringing of certain cases where there weren't large economic damages. Now, I'm glad to say this. The Missouri Supreme Court, in a landmark decision that took place about 6 months ago, has ruled that cap unconstitutional. So we no longer have that cap in Missouri. That's the only good thing that's happened lately.
What do you think the result of that will be?
Right now, the result that I have seen so far is not too much. I happen to have a case right now that was greatly affected by this, because I've got a very young lady, and she has a lot of non-economic damages. And when I was capped at $350,000, this was a much less valuable case. Now, without the cap, this is a case where she will get a more fair result, hopefully.
Well, I think we had Larry and Andy talked to our residents for about 2 hours prior to coming here. And one of the things that came out is that I think most people feel like the malpractice crisis, if there truly is one, is a result of the plaintiff bar. And I think Larry's view is interesting, in which he feels that it's really about the money. And when you're talking money, you're always talking corporations, and basically you're talking insurance corporations, to some degree the large medical corporations, and that this isn't really about justice either for the physician or for the injured plaintiffs, but that this is really always about the money. And that,
of course, it's about the money, but a lot of other things are too. It's just that this system is so inequitable in terms of what happens with the money. We put a lot of money in the front end, and the vast majority of that money goes to profits for insurance companies, goes to lawyers' fees, goes to expert witness fees, and goes to litigation support fees, and very little of it, very little, actually finds its way into the hands of an injured person.
So what percentage would you say overall?
Well, that's interesting. There hasn't been a definitive study on this for the last 30 plus years. And the reason is that insurance mechanisms changed. Back before they changed very dramatically, when most of the malpractice coverage was with traditional insurance companies, we were able to get a measurement. And that measurement was this: of all the money being paid in premiums for medical malpractice insurance, something less than 30%, right at 29 point something percent, actually found its way into the hands of an injured plaintiff.
That's still a lot better than the percentage of money spent on food that the farmer gets. What's that, like less than a penny? A penny,
Yeah,
2 pennies, maybe 3?
But you have to compare apples and apples.
Right.
Take a look at automobile liability insurance. In the same study, automobile liability insurance paid for bodily injury. 80% of that premium found its way into the hands of people injured in car accidents.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about that when we come back to. I also want to get Andrew into the conversation to get your perspective. And folks, you're welcome to join the call as well. The number to dial, toll-free 855-244-0077. You can also email me at fallonforum@gmail.com. I can not only read it on the computer screen now, but I have a fancy phone, and I can read it on that as well. So give us a shot when you're ready to join the conversation. Again, we'll talk more about this. We're going to have Nick Harrington joining us for the very tail end of the show to talk about the Steve King rally. That is the rally on the other side of Steve King's perspective on immigration. Again, I want to thank Gateway Market & Cafe for sponsoring this segment of our program and encourage you to support our local grocery store who keep their money in the community and also help make this talk show possible. I want to thank a couple of our Newton business supporters as well. Dan Kelly and his real estate business. Also, Dan Kelly's got a DJ business. If you've got a wedding or some other function you'd like to have him perform at. Speaking of weddings, Diana's Wedding Cakes, also out of Newton. Not just cakes, but cookies, cupcakes, and a lot of other stuff for many occasions. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Remax Real Estate Concept Studios. This is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little, until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day 1 of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to the Fallon Forum. That's Babers Neighbors, Mr. Babers and Neighbors to you, kicking off the conversation with their tune, Ode to Jones. Mr. Jones to you, I suppose. Hey, we're talking about medical malpractice. Later in the program, Nick Harrington joining us with an update on efforts to move forward on immigration reform. And you know what? It seems like that's going to happen, despite the best efforts of our crazy Congressman Steve King. But right now, we're talking about medical malpractice, and Charles Goldman is in the studio with me. He's co-hosting with me today, as he often does. He'll be guest hosting for me a couple times when I'm off on the road there in a couple weeks. So you'll have him all to yourselves. If you want to join the conversation, 244-0077. And toll free, it's 855-244-0077. Medical malpractice. Andrew, you've been very quiet on this subject. Is that
I'm eager to join the conversation.
Well, jump in.
From a practical consideration, I have to say, first and foremost, I'm very fortunate to work at a law firm where our first priority is whether or not we can help someone when they come to us with a major physical injury that they claim was caused by medical malpractice. This is not the standard across the industry, and that the hurdles of tort reform, the expense of litigating such a suit, provides a real disincentives for plaintiffs' attorneys to take on serious injuries that are not permanent or not severe enough to culminate in an award that will pay for those expenses in that time.
What would the evil law firm on the other side of town? What would their motive be for addressing a claim?
Certainly, in any sort of business, there is accounting and bookkeeping to be had and profits to be claimed. However, like I said, in this instance, I work for a veteran of this industry, so that I'm able to do what I see as a public service and take on a lot of clients who elsewhere cannot find legal representation due to the nature of their injury.
So the percentage of money that goes to the client that Larry was referencing earlier, that might be less with your clients because your clients are getting a better deal on the percentage that they receive once the settlement is achieved.
Well, fortunately,
you mean more, don't you?
Yes, more. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, more.
Fortunately
more.
and unfortunately, there is a freedom of contract in this great country, so that even sophisticated and unsophisticated parties can agree to something, and it has to be followed. We find that one of the most moral contracts is that of a pure contingency fee agreement in which expenses are taken out before any attorney's fees are factored in. Normally they range from all the way to a quarter to 50%, depending on the attorney.
Well, I think one thing we discussed this morning, which is important, is physicians tend to see the contingency setup as part of the problem,
Right.
and to some degree Larry does too, because Larry, as he points out, 70% of all the money that comes into the system is being diverted away from the injured.
Right.
But I think Larry made a good point about why the contingency system is in fact the best way to go. And actually, I think convinced a number of the people sitting in the room who are all doctors that it's not as unfair as we think it is.
Well, there are two big things there. First off is the access to legal representation.
Mm-hmm.
Many of our clients would not be able to pay us an hourly fee to work for them, and certainly couldn't begin to pay us an hourly fee for the number of hours that we're going to have to put in on a difficult case. That's number one. Secondly, if you really think about it, it's the purest form of representation because we don't get paid unless we get something for our client.
Okay.
And our motive is to get as much as we can for our client as soon as we can with as little expense as possible, because we share the expense. As Andy told you, we take the expenses out first before we apply our ratio. And our contracts have never been above a third. So we're not in the 40, 50% range. We take a third of the net recovery.
Is there any check within the field itself on what's a reasonable contingency fee? Are there any standards out there?
I wish there were. I mean,
Well, you know, it's the free market at work, which is always a favorite on this show.
It's one of the basic rights that we enjoy in this country is freedom of contract. And like I said, unfortunately,
Well, unless you're making the contract with a large corporation, then as we found out in the Supreme Court, you don't have freedom of contract. You, in fact, only have freedom to be arbitrated by other corporate arbitrators.
Well, whether or not you understand the contract or whether or not you agree to its terms is another issue. One thing I would say is that on the defense side, as far as where the premiums go and are not being paid out to compensable injuries, those attorneys on the defense side are being paid by the hour. And when they take these cases, there's a certain expectation within their firms of how long and how far they're going to litigate these until they come up with some opinion to get back to their client or the insurer regarding where to go from there.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things we've talked about the system as is, and I think Larry and I are philosophically aligned. I just met Andy today, so I can't say he is, but probably is, that the system as is neither recompenses the injured, nor does it make medicine safer in this country. It's almost a lottery.
It actually, in my view, contributes to more problems within medicine, and the reason is, as I said in my talk earlier, the blame game. Medical malpractice is predicated upon a standard of negligence, which basically is this. You have to do what no good doctor should do to be guilty of malpractice. It's not like I looked away from the road a second to tune my radio and I couldn't get stopped and I hit the car in front of me. That's not malpractice. Okay, it just isn't. That medical negligence is you've got to do something really bad. You've got to do something that we all agree no good doctor should do before you're guilty of malpractice. And that means that there's a stigma attached to that label, medical malpractice. And that stigma is such that no doctor wants to admit to it. And in fact, when a patient is injured, the first thing that the doctor's attorney, the hospital's attorney, everybody else will do is say to the physician, say to the nurses, whatever you do, don't say you're sorry. Don't say that we wish that, don't say anything like that because it'll be interpreted against you, okay? Even though maybe it could be something very clear-cut where the doctor, ordinarily, if it was in some other area of life, would sit down and say, you know, I'm sorry. I made a mistake here and it hurt you and I'm very sorry about it. And I want you to know that the doctors are prevented from saying that. And because we have this blame system, one of the other things that happens is in a hospital setting, someone is injured and the injured person becomes a pariah, a veritable leper in the hospital. No one wants to get anywhere near their case. People don't want to talk to them anymore. It's really sad. I've had a number of clients come to me and say, you know, if somebody would have just said they were sorry, I might not be here talking to you. But they don't even talk to me about it.
I mean, the process. The process demeans everybody.
Yeah,
and it just from not being able to have a relationship with the patient and undermining the therapeutic relationship, it creates a mindset where the patient becomes the enemy, and it doesn't just it's not just that patient. It ramifies through someone's practice for a very long time. Then when you look at the people involved in the process, especially the experts, you know, the expert testimony, particularly on the defense side, is almost always predictable. Maybe it is, you know, maybe this was done wrong, but it didn't matter because the patient would have died anyway, or something along. You know, it's always kind of the same thing, and it demeans the people involved. It demeans the physician involved, because they become defensive and unfortunately sometimes do things in terms of how the records are handled or other things that make you question, or they do post facto addendums that are. Well, it's all very demeaning.
Think of it this way: if someone's seriously injured, the only way they recover through this system is to prove that someone did something terribly wrong.
Right,
so that creates a search for blame. And a search for blame gets in the way of the most important thing that we should be doing, which is error cause identification.
And when we got to go to a short break here, but when we come back, I want to talk more about the problem of physicians prescribing tests that aren't really necessary, but they're there just to cover their butt.
No, that's a really good question.
Defensive medicine.
Let's say
when we get back though. We have to do my climate change story.
Climate change story first. Then we talk about the authorization of way too many tests as preventive in order to prevent a lawsuit. But I got to say too, on the subject of an apology, I don't know what we can do to create a system where it's easier to apologize, because you're right though. A simple apology can go a long way. I lived in a neighborhood that was plagued with prostitution. And it made a huge world of a difference to both the neighbors and the prostitutes, and in some cases, the customers of the prostitutes, when we came together and they said, hey, sorry for what I did in your neighborhood. That made a big difference. Mm-hmm. The other day, I got peed on by a dog. If the owner had come up to me and said, hey, I'm sorry my dog peed on you, that would have made me feel a lot better. It never happened. So I'm mad at that. I'm mad at that person. And I'm not holding the dog responsible.
I mean, in venues where that is part of the practice, for instance, University of Michigan has a very aggressive program in which they identify possible litigation situations, and they go right to that process of saying sorry to the patient, of understanding that they have a right to some damages.
Very wise thing to do.
And it's cut their costs almost, I think, 40 or 50% in terms of malpractice coverage and litigation and all that.
Folks, I want to thank our Community CPA for helping to sponsor this segment of our program. They're now the 10th largest accounting and tax firm in Iowa, compliments of tremendous leadership provided by Ying Sa. I also want to thank Sergeant's Garage. That's at 6th and College. They've been working on cars for a long time, including 4 generations of Fallon mobiles. All of them, some of them died a timely death. This one, 237 miles. 237,000 miles.
And that's a young car for a Fallon mobile.
It's a young car. No, actually, it's the oldest one I've ever had. But I don't drive it that much anymore. I went out there the other day to start it up. There was a plant growing out of the windshield. That's so cool. Anyway, we've got some great business supporters, folks, and go to my website, FallonForum.com. Make sure you thank them for supporting this program by patronizing their business. We're going to continue our conversation on medical malpractice when we come back in just a couple minutes.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershot.
I am administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
If we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
It's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now, and then leave, and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
That's Max Wellman, folks, and I want to thank Story County Veterinary Clinic for sponsoring this segment of our show. Yep, that's Dr. Kim Holding. She's been working on critters for over 3 decades. She operates the Story County Veterinary Clinic on Highway 30 between Ames and Nevada. Check out her work, folks. Your pets will be coming home smiling. Okay, we're talking more about medical malpractice here before we shift into a later conversation about immigration reform and crazy old Steve King. But Charles is chomping at the bit to share some climate change story that's on his mind.
Well, this is the longest I've been on the show in months where we didn't talk about the Great March.
I know,
but
I'm slipping.
Last week we talked about, or a couple weeks ago, we talked about methane, which is the sort of silent and not talked about greenhouse gas. But I read an article yesterday that there's another thing we should be worried about, which is spontaneous human combustion.
Human beings just kind of bursting
into flames. There was an article about a baby in India who was burst into flames 4 separate times, according to her parent.
What?
They claim that she's burst into flames 4 separate times.
She's not the reincarnation of Shiva, is she?
No. And there's actually somebody who did a study with infusing meat with acetone and was supposedly able to make it spontaneously combust and leave a pile of ashes. But this may be an area that you have to deal with on the Great March.
With marchers just walking along the desert highway, Highway 62, boom, suddenly there was a marcher.
Research into spontaneous human combustion.
Yeah.
Because that's another heat source that we hadn't thought about.
Okay, so, but there's got to be a pretty steep carbon and methane release from that,
I would think
source
so.
of burning. Okay.
So that's my climate change story for the day.
You know, you're not getting enough work. You must not be busy enough, Charles, to come up with these kind of stories. Gosh.
Anyway,
medical malpractice. I wonder what kind of a lawsuit would be associated with a human who spontaneously combusted.
Well, usually results is a child abuse suit. You know, the figuring is usually that the parents did it.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, medical malpractice. One question that keeps coming up in my world is, okay, so how often are physicians prescribing tests that really don't need to happen, but they want to cover their butts, make sure they're not going to be subject to a lawsuit? Andrew?
Well, Larry may be able to speak more knowledgeably to this.
Too often. Too often, quite simply, because, again, we have this blame-based system, and we have an expert-driven system. So when we have the bad result, and keeping in mind that the only way the person who suffered the bad result gets to collect is to find somebody to pin the blame on, and they need an expert in order to do that, then the expert's job is to look at this case and see, oh, this negative, this negative, this negative. Oh, they didn't do this one. Well, gee, maybe if they'd done that one, it would have shown something that would have tipped this cancer off sooner, and so that's where I'll go. See what I mean? And so the doctor now, thinking forward, says, oh, well, if I do every possible test that could be done here, even though some of them don't really make sense and aren't feasible economically, but if I do every one, then I will avoid, I will not leave any place to be criticized. And that's so-called defensive medicine.
Yeah, the estimate is that less than 1% of the medical expenditures in the United States are related to defensive medicine.
Less than 1%?
Correct.
Really?
Here again, it's a shunting away of the responsibility for the costs.
Mm-hmm.
The physicians are not driving up costs because they make up their compensation makes up also a very, probably high single-digit percentage of the medical expenditure. Huge amount of medical expenditure on technology sold by big companies. So, for instance, you can have your gallbladder taken out through a standard 4-hole laparoscopic procedure. But now they want to sell you the robot, right?
What?
The robotic surgery. You know, is
What's
there any
that?
evidence
So-
that robotic surgery is safer? No.
Is that going to put you out of work?
No, it's not the robot doing the surgery. You're driving the robot. But the thing is that it creates in the mind of the American patient that technology is better, more testing is better.
Yeah.
And the cost of that is oftentimes hidden. So, for instance, you say, okay, I'm going to get a mammogram. Because what have American women been told? They've been told they should get mammograms, right?
Right. And I was just going to bring up that example.
Dares, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who ever dares to say that maybe we should get less mammograms is immediately hooted down because someone says, well, they found my cancer on a mammogram. But the question it runs into is, well, when they said maybe we should stop getting mammograms after age 75, they said, well, that's ageism. That's not fair. But the problem is that what are you going to find in an 80-year-old woman on a mammogram that would have shortened her life? You're not really going to find a cancer you could easily feel. You're going to find precancer. So now we're treating precancer in somebody who's got a 5-year life expectancy.
How about the PSA? I think that's
Well, PSA is an interesting thing. It's a very different thing with PSA. Men were much more willing to accept that they weren't going to do their PSAs.
This is a prostate?
Prostate, right.
Right,
Because
okay.
men have a much, I think, a sense of the cost of being wrong. That is, of getting treated. Because if you get radiated or you have surgery, the possibility of impotence or urinary dysfunction is very high. And when men began to see, and I can tell you probably 90% of male physicians do not get their PSAs checked.
Really?
And that, to me, is actually the criteria for
It's
what you should do
indicative,
to
yeah.
your patient. If you're not going to let
So why
something be done to you, don't do it to your
So
patient.
why is it higher? Why is it so much higher?
In terms of because I think the cost of being wrong and treating something that's probably not going to kill you is higher.
Yeah.
And so men are revolting against that.
Men are revolting.
Right. But I think that what happens is my patients come in and they say, you have somebody with a tiny breast cancer who comes in. The first test they want is a PET scan. The PET scan is a radioactive way of trying to find small deposits of tumor cells. The false positive rate of that is 25% in a stage 1 breast cancer. The chance that a stage 1 breast cancer patient will actually have metastatic disease away from the breast is less than 10%. In other words, they want a test that has a higher false positive rate. That is, that you're going to see something that has nothing to do with the breast cancer, nor does it have anything to do with your longevity, is higher than the risk of what you're looking for.
I'd like to throw out an example that was brought to my attention the other day. And just tell me, and I shared this with a friend of mine who claimed that this should be a case of malpractice, medical malpractice. This happened years ago, but the woman who was preparing to deliver a child, fourth child, first 3 delivered without any problem at all. Fourth child, they gave her Pitocin, and she overheard very clearly, without any mistake, the doctor talking to the nurse. It was Friday. He was desperate to get out on the lake and enjoy a good weekend, and he just wanted to get this damn thing over, and so prescribed Pitocin strictly for that purpose. Is that, I mean, I think that's wrong on so many levels, and I presume you would all agree with me that that's wrong and horrifying. Is that the basis for any kind of a malpractice claim? And should it be?
Was there any damage?
Yeah.
Well, damage, I mean...
No, I mean, you have to have causation. You have to have that the action led to some damage. Not that
In other words,
you
if
think it's
there's a
bad
happy,
practice.
healthy baby born, then there's no case.
Yeah, but for the doctor to prescribe something that was totally unnecessary...
Now,
so
that's
that
a
he
different
could-
question when you say, was that wrong? I think we both
course
agree
it is.
that was wrong.
Okay.
Right.
But malpractice takes damages, too. Yeah, there have to be damages. Look, I see all kinds of things. I always tell people that here's what. I see tons of malpractice, but a lot of it, thank God, doesn't cause any injuries.
But being given a drug you don't need, and who knows what side effects that might have or how it might affect you psychologically. I mean, could she argue that, well, it's I didn't, I knew I didn't need this. I have the experience, the historical perspective on it. This is a violation of my rights. There's no case there to be made for that.
Well, look at it another way. There's a lot of OBs out there right now who are scheduling elective C-sections so that the woman can have this birth at a convenient time, and the doctor can as well.
Right.
Okay, that's more bothersome to me.
Well, yeah, and the rate of C-sections used to be 5 to 8%. Now it's up to 30 to 35%. 30 to 35%. And I
Well,
mean,
I don't want to talk specifically about OB because this is not something I do, and I can't argue, what the indications are. But part of this is related to expectation. That woman expected that her physician was going to deliver the child.
Right.
That physician has a right at some point to say, I'm gone. I mean, professionalism certainly is about servitude to your patient, but it's not indentured servitude, and
no, but it's part of the
but the
turf.
American
It goes
public
with the
is
turf. If you're
used, but the American public wants their physician there all the time. The system is moving towards a shift work system, which is probably the only way to make it work. I agree with you; it's wrong.
Yeah.
But part of this is you cannot spend your whole life in the hospital, and the patients are used to a certain thing.
Sure, but you expect the doctor, your doctor will be there. You expect your doctor will be there for the delivery.
If you're
Just
doing
as you
something as
expect
unpredictable as a birth, how can your doctor be there all the time?
You also expect your midwife or your doula to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to switch doulas in midstream or midwives in midstream. You're not, and you shouldn't be expected to have to switch physicians in midstream either.
Well,
right?
I mean, I don't. Andy wanted to talk to this. That's sort of what the HMO is about.
This sad situation, I believe, and what you're describing is the alienation from the doctor from their patient. This is something that is more recent, I think, is correlated, if not caused, by the rise of the large HMO. With that said, though, there is a benefit to the economy of scale of medical services, and technology will drive that, and also groups of people will drive that. However, it just results.
And that's what HMOs have done. They've created those economies of scale.
You would hope, but it has also created a very large profit incentive from a corporate structure of bureaucracy in which the physicians are finding themselves as nothing but components,
right?
And their own roles in it are being circumscribed and ascribed away from this complete dedication to their patient. And they are now, their role in it is being dictated by a larger goal.
Now, is the HMO cat out of the bag so far that there's no putting it back in, or is there some way to restore some guidelines that make sure that doesn't happen, that it isn't totally driven by profit, that doctors, again, feel they have some key role to play other than just a cog in that HMO's machine?
Well, you have to be careful a little bit about the use of the word profit. For instance, a nonprofit hospital does have to drive some profit.
Sure.
Particularly in this country where technological and infrastructure change is very critical. The expectation is you have to make money on the patient somewhere. This gets into a much larger issue, which is, and it's an interesting question that Andy raises, because I would argue that, as we talked about before, and as Larry was saying, it's the practice of medicine, it's the practice of law. You get better at it as you do more. In some sense, I would say practitioners early in their career would be better off in systems in which they're prescribed as to how they practice, in which they work with algorithms until they get the experience. You should earn the right to freelance. In other words, I know what the guidelines are for breast cancer, but I, at times, because I've been doing this for 25 years, I freelance based on my knowledge of what I've seen, how those guidelines work out. I've seen for this patient how those guidelines work out. That's what you're paying somebody to do. I do think that there should be greater responsibility, and residency is usually where the responsibility stops, and then all of a sudden you're out there. I also think we have to have a discussion about rationing. We have to have a discussion about when does it become ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, we have rationing right now.
Keep things going.
Well, see, that's how I was going to
No, we have de facto rationing now.
That's what I meant. Right. It is de facto rationing. I've been on the receiving end of it.
The question that we have been dodging for some time now is this. Number one is the right to medical care. Is that a right or a privilege of a citizen? And number two, if you agree, as most of us do, that there must be a right to medical care for each citizen, then the next question is a difficult one, and Charles is speaking to it as well. How much medical care is a right?
And what is the individual's responsibility?
Yeah, when does it cross over to privilege, okay? do we want society to pay for tummy tucks and chin jobs?
And Cialis? No. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a line to be drawn, and to me, that's a really pretty clear line.
Well, I think the basic distinction is medicine about prolongation of life, or is medicine about reduction of suffering? Now, I believe it's more about reduction of suffering, to be perfectly honest.
I would make a third suggestion. It's about assisting us to remain healthy. And
that's correct. But physicians, this is a sickness industry. It's not a wellness industry.
Well, I mean, and that's part of my problem.
Right. I totally agree with you. Yeah. But I do think that we need to move away from the making people live chronologically longer. We need to make people live whatever time they have better. Right. And that's where we're getting lost.
Well, what we need to look at is a combination not of longevity and quality of life. Okay, those two things have to be considered together.
Correct. And these are not decisions only physicians can make, but our society as a whole doesn't want to make these decisions at all, because we were used to the idea that we had so much slack in the system, you could just do what you wanted. However much it costs, somebody would pay for it. Yeah.
Well, I don't see our final guest showing up. I would, if you gentlemen have another couple minutes.
Sure.
I would love to get your take on the Affordable Care Act as it relates to the issue of medical malpractice, but more broadly, I mean, a lot of stuff is going to be happening really soon on that issue. I wouldn't mind getting your take. I'm sure it's something you've thought about.
Well, after the Republicans tried to defund it for the 48th time.
48th time. Who's counting? Hey, we'll be back in just a couple minutes, folks, so stick around with us. Again, I want to thank the Immigrant Entrepreneur Summit for sponsoring this segment of our show and remind you about that event coming up on November 9th at Drake University. It's a great opportunity to learn how to start and grow your business. You can learn about how the Affordable Care Act will affect what you do business-wise. You can also learn about any changes to the tax code, and you can get help putting together a business plan. For only $35, it's an entire day of great information. And last year, by the way, about 500 people showed up, and about 100 new business startups came out of the Immigrant Entrepreneur Summit. Check it out online, IES at IESUSA.org. I'll be back in just a couple minutes.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day uno, one of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back, folks. That's Mary McAdams. I want to thank the rest of our business supporters who make this show possible. I want to thank Fighting Burrito. Great custom-made burritos. You can get them here in Des Moines on 13th Street, just south of Locust in the Nationwide building. $6, 50 cents for a fantastic and very filling burrito. Also available at Fighting Burrito's flagship restaurant in Ames on Welch Avenue. I want to thank Tally's Restaurant Bar and Catering as well. Got several great business clients who are restaurants. Tally's is in Beaverdale, and Charles and I have eaten there on several occasions.
Yes, we have.
Fantastic rooftop patio overlooking Beaverdale. Also a patio on the street as well. Hawk Restaurant is one of my other favorite places. Again, not just because they're a client, but because 90% of what they serve comes from Iowa farms and Iowa producers. They also
So there's a lot of corn dishes.
No, I'm talking about food. Not they used to call corn feed corn. I mean, we can't call it feed corn. I mean, very little gets fed to cattle. Nothing gets fed to people anymore.
Right.
It feeds your car. It feeds the
car.
it feeds the laboratories that make high fructose corn syrup.
It
So
turns into sugar. And then
I can assure you that Hawk Restaurant gets very little feed corn delivered to their restaurant. It is really good stuff. Okay, we want to wrap up the conversation here by talking about the Affordable Care Act. That's big news. Let's just start with Larry. What's your take on the Affordable Care Act as it relates to this conversation, but more broadly as well?
Well, the Affordable Care Act is a halfway measure. As I said before, if we agree that certain amount of medical care has got to be every citizen's right, then government has got to ensure our rights. Government ensures all of our other rights. It's got to ensure the right to some level of medical care. And the Affordable Care Act is an attempt to do this, but it's a halfway attempt. It's not going all the way to a single-payer system. It's trying to keep private enterprise involved. Private enterprise has to make a profit. So we've got this hybrid thing. The biggest problem that I see with it is that the healthcare mandate side of it, highly controversial side of it, is creating almost a caste system within society. Unless young, healthy people sign up, we can't run this thing.
But why would they want to? It's too expensive. It's cheaper to go ahead and pay the fine than to sign up for insurance. And there's no cost control. I mean, the insurance companies are going to continue to raise their rates, even though they're required to cover pre-existing conditions and other things. They'll continue to raise their rates to make up for that problem. I mean, the fact that insurance stock went up significantly the day the Affordable Care Act was enacted says volumes about who's really going to benefit from this program.
Let me just say this. I still believe we're ultimately going to have to go to a single-payer system. I'm not a great believer in government or socialism or anything like that, but I'm just a realist. And for instance, I'm on Medicare. And Medicare is a system that whatever you think about, Medicare works. And in fact, Medicare is now becoming a little bit more progressive in that they charge me a premium for Medicare, which is based upon my income. Okay, so I'll pay more for Medicare than people who are truly retired because I'm making money. And that's fair, and I don't mind that. But it's a single payer, and I can go anywhere, plunk down that Medicare card, and I'm going to be treated.
Andy, what's your take on the Affordable Care Act?
I think there's a large disconnect here regarding the citizenry that we have in this country. We have rising unemployment. It continues to grow. Inflation will continue to grow. I believe it's being masked right now by those who deem it so. And the problem here is we have people who, either if they're living on welfare or if they're living, on basic pay, they're eating things that lack nutrition because they're easily accessible and they're the lowest common denominator and the most available. And I don't know how you run a large health insurance scheme at all with that being the practical reality of what's happening outside the hospitals and the facilities. I also question whether or not, laws such as in New York, where they're trying to create soda taxes and soda bans, infringe upon some sort of liberty that we are supposed to enjoy in this country. However, I also have problems with the citizens maybe not being educated enough to make their own rational choice about what is the best thing to put in their body and for their children.
And sleep and exercise and healthy choices and all sorts of other areas. Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of it is personal responsibility, but it's much bigger than that too. And I think a lot of it centers on the question of, is healthcare a right or a privilege? And at what point does, as Charles mentioned earlier, is rationing needed because there is an element that does become
we need to harmonize the system. I mean, you have a system in which you've got for-profit elements that say that 20 and 30% profit is appropriate. Then you have other elements like nonprofit hospitals where unless you're a major cancer center, you're lucky if you can scratch out 1% to 2% margin. then you're trying to constrain the cost at the end of the supply line. The people who are making out like bandits are the suppliers to this system. The pharmaceutical companies, the equipment suppliers. They are unchecked, unbridled. And until you harmonize that, and then the insurance companies certainly make profit. Yeah. Until you harmonize what you think is a reasonable profit, either by taxation of those profits or by regulation, this system is going to be what it is.
So do we all kind of agree that a single-payer system would be good?
You can run a single-payer system with an element of corporate activity. Germany does it.
Germany does
it, running them basically as utilities, and utilities are profitable.
Regulated.
But there's one other thing that most people don't even realize that you could get rid of right away and save yourself a bunch of money. There are a number of companies out there right now whose sole job is medical bill review and reduction. Mm-hmm. That's all these companies do. They get bills and they apply some sort of formula for what is reasonable and customary, and they reduce the bills. And these people get paid a percentage of what they reduce the bills by, and they contribute absolutely nothing.
Right. With a system in which we didn't have billing and 15,000 different forms to fill out,
codes.
All you would do is code for the purposes of public health to figure out what happens to these people when they come into your hospital.
I got to run 2 quick questions. I'll make it 1 quick question. How many times will the Republican Congress, they've already voted to repeal Obamacare 48 times. How many times will the Republican caucus vote to repeal Obamacare before they are replaced by a Democratic majority? Charles, your prediction?
Democratic majority in the House?
Yeah. How many times will the Republican Congress vote to replace?
If they vote 50 times per year until the end of the century, that's my number.
That's your number?
Because I don't think you're going to have a Democratic majority in the House for the next 80 years.
So the end of the century?
Pretty much.
So you're talking about 1,000 or more?
At least.
Okay. All right. Who can do better than that, Andy?
I mean, I believe the system will come into fruition no matter what, and that there will be many Republicans and Democrats benefiting from it in the end.
You're such an accommodating fellow. Larry?
I believe we have come to the point where we can't keep doing the same thing a whole lot longer, and that sooner or later some people are going to step up, take leadership roles, and we need to start doing something sensible.
The correct answer, this is like the McLaughlin group now. I get to give you all the correct. The correct answer is 66. The Republican Congress will vote 66 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act before being replaced by a Democratic majority next November.
Well, this would be a way to fund the Great March. We could run like a little lottery on this and pay
we could do some gambling. Yeah, no, anyway, that would not work well. Anyway, folks, thanks so much for joining us. I want to thank Ritual Cafe, one more of our business supporters. They've got a great little shop, folks, on 13th Street, right across from the Papa John's Center. It's a wonderful place for tea, coffee, smoothies, paninis, and music. Check them out. That's Ritual Cafe. I want to thank Maddie Arrington, my producer. Also want to thank my guests, Charles Goldman, Larry Ferguson, and Andy Withington. Thank you all so much for traveling here from Missouri. Have a safe trip back, and thanks to Webcast One Live for sharing the studio with us.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.